Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996. Welcome back to the Gay Buddhist Fellowship. Our tradition before we introduce our speakers is to introduce ourselves. So I'll go around. I encourage you to just take a brief breath or pause before you say your name so you don't quite reach through and we have a better opportunity to remember each other's names. I'm Tom.
I'm Adam.
My name is Henry.
Gary. Prasada Chitta.
My name is Gary.
Harry.
I'm Patrick.
My name is Mark.
Baruch.
Kaleo.
John. My name is Jerry.
I'm John.
I'm Amos.
My name is Jean.
I'm Clint. Leor.
My name is Cass.
My name is Roy.
I'm George.
My name is Val.
My name is Harley.
My name is John.
My name is David.
I'm Richard.
My name is Brian.
I'm Hal.
Peter. I'm John.
And Jack.
Wonderful. Anybody joining us just for the first time or after a long absence? Okay, wonderful. So today we have the pleasure of hearing a Dharma Duo. This is when we have two of our members get up and sort of tell their story of how they came to the Dharma, how they came to GBF, a little bit of insight on their past and perhaps what their practice is like. Rather than seeing ourselves as teachers of one another, I like to think that it's just taking a slice of a cross-section of the membership, opening it up and seeing what you get. So it gives us an opportunity to get to know each other better and the variety and scope of all those who come to GBF. And so today we have Jeff Lindemood and Michael Murphy. Welcome.
Thank you. So good morning and happy solstice and happy Father's Day. I know we have a few fathers. Could the fathers in the group raise their hands? Just want to honor you. So we're going to forego formal introductions because I think as we speak about ourselves, you may learn more than you ever wanted to know. And our format's going to be a little bit of kind of yours, mine, and ours, and we're going to start with our relationship because I've known Jeff, whom I've always known as Bharat. We met in 1987 in graduate school in a master's program in counseling psychology with an emphasis in transpersonal psychology. So this was at John F. Kennedy University. And I think that was a really important developmental period for both of us. I was 30, Bharat was 29. And this was a program part of whose philosophy was if you were going to help somebody else, you could only take them as far as you had gone in terms of personal work. So there was a real emphasis on looking at your own narrative and doing your own work. So one of the contexts in which we met was a year-long group process. There were 16 of us, and among those 16 were 3 gay men. There actually were 4 gay men, but one of them was a Mormon guy who was pretty much in the closet. But But the other two gay men and I, we really went through the program as brothers in a sense, with the love of brothers and also a lot of the sibling dynamics. And in this group process class, we were often called upon to get in the middle of the circle and, pound on pillows. And the guy who facilitated it really was sort of from the encounter group, late 60s, early 70s period. So, that was
Italian.
And that was, for me, that was kind of mortifying because I really had to kind of spill my guts and reveal myself. But it also was really important. So that was the context in which we met. In that program, one of our teachers was Helen Palmer, who teaches the Enneagram. And so we learned both traditional psychiatric diagnoses, but concurrently we learned the Enneagram. And so we would have panels of 6 people, all of whom were the same type within the Enneagram. The Enneagram is a personality typology. It's very dynamic, it's pretty complicated, but it's a way of helping you understand what your own skew of attention is, what your own preoccupations are, how you're defended. So it's really a lot about your own conditioning and the lens through which you look at the world. So the Enneagram was something that I think we both, and all of us in that program, we used as a way of understanding ourselves and understanding other people.
I was remembering that we also took about a year-long Buddhist psychotherapy course with Waltzing Lapke, who was one of the Dalai Lama's secretaries, but we really related to the Buddha, Dharma, and Abhidhamma. So, but along the way, the 3 of us gay men became very close, as you mentioned, and one of the things that we did was spend an intentional afternoon doing MDMA together and just sharing part of our stories together. And I had already given the name Bharat, which was a part of the Hindu epic, the Ramayana. And it's a story about 4 brothers who are princes in this kingdom, and it's Ramayana is the way of Ram. So he's the heir apparent to the throne, and these other 3 brothers, and he go through this great leela or drama around all that happening, and the 10-headed evil god takes his beautiful wife, and they have to get her back. And that's where Hanuman comes in. That this is Hanuman, flying monkey, who's the symbol of the Indian army. He's a great warrior, but also the epitome of devotion to Ram and serving Ram. So during that ecstasy experience, there was a sense of telling, my experience around that mythic story, and realizing that it felt like, that I was in the presence of my actual brothers in that story, 2 of the other ones, and that Bhagavad was Lakshman, and Lakshman was the shadow or the constant accompaniment of Ram. And when they were banned to the forest for 14 years, which is a whole long story, but Lakshman went with him to protect him and go with him on that. And, Bharat remained to sort of, run the house, take care of the kingdom until he came back. But, and that's continued to be a really profound aspect that's lived on in our connection together. We have many levels of brotherness together, and it's been really nice to know Michael through, so many deep and transformative times. And then it has not only the sibling on the human personality level, but so many other levels to it. And the other two things, we also had a brief moment of friends with benefits. We were thought better of that. And years later, after being apart, after graduate school, I was dating this guy whose best friend was the boyfriend of Lenny, who's somebody you know here. And I hadn't been in touch with him for many years either, but he asked me if I wanted to go to a reading of a play, and he showed me the advertisement that said play by Lenny Pinna. I said, Lenny Pinna? And it was our Lenny Pinna. And it turns out when I finally connected with him, he said, I know somebody else you know, Michael Murphy. And so anyway, it's a small world, and that's our story.
So one of the opportunities of doing this was really to reflect on practice and what practice is for me, and kind of distilling it down to its essence. And what I landed upon was my desire to really show up for the experience of being human. That's what I need help with. So for me, I was raised Catholic, and that narrative was very much about kind of the hereafter and the living for something in the future. It never particularly had resonance for me. So this sense of wanting to show up, deeply for both really the agony and the ecstasy of being in a body and being a human being, and then what gets in the way of that? What are the obstacles to being fully present? And for me, it was very much about my conditioning and my personal story. So I wanted to share a little bit about that. I also wanted to start with a quote which just had a lot of meaning for me. And this is from Pema Chodron. Taking refuge in the Buddha means that we are willing to spend our life reconnecting with the quality of being continually awake. Every time we feel like taking refuge in a habitual means of escape, we take off more armor, undoing all the stuff that covers over our wisdom and our gentleness and our awake quality. We're not trying to be something we aren't, rather, we're reconnecting with who we are. So when we say, I take refuge in the Buddha, that means I take refuge in the courage and the potential of fearlessness, of removing all the armor that covers this awakeness of mine. I am awake. I will spend my life taking this armor off. Nobody else can take it off because nobody else knows where all the little locks are. Nobody else knows where it's sewed up tight, where it's going to take a lot of work to get that particular iron thread untied. You have to do it alone. The basic instruction is simple. Start taking off that armor. That's all anyone can tell you. No one can tell you how to do it because you're the only one who knows how you locked yourself in there to start. And among the first Dharma that I read was Trungpa Rinpoche, and particularly the Shambhala book. And so that whole idea of a warrior and of taking the armor off and kind of being raw and vulnerable was very, very appealing to me, and also the courage that it takes to do that. Because I think I'm not alone in this, but I really want to be connected in an intimate way, and I don't necessarily mean in a romantic, sexual way, but just to have intimacy. And in order to do that, I think we have to be revealed in some way, and we have to be vulnerable, I feel vulnerable now. And it takes a lot of courage to do that, because these places where I locked myself up, to revisit those, you pretty much have to revisit the underlying pain, the underlying distress, whatever it was. So I brought a picture of my father. I'm going to start with something about my father, because that's my mother. She comes later. So this is a picture of my father. He was like an exceedingly handsome man who was very charming. His name's Edmund Robert Murphy, and I want to honor him before I rake him over the coals. My experience of my father was that I always longed to be close to him. I mean, he was such a handsome guy. I wanted to be close to him, but I was the fifth child, kind of later in my parents' marriage. My oldest sibling, my only sister, was 13 years older than I. And I think by the time I came along, I was very close to my mom, and there was not so much intimacy between my parents anymore. So, now in retrospect, the way I understand it was I sort of won my mother. I had the intimacy with my mother, and so there was a lot of antipathy from my father toward me that I didn't really understand. So anyway, he was very much an enigma to me, and I don't want to get sort of lost in that story, but the point is, what I learned from my father, because I knew nothing about his personal history. Both of his parents were dead by the time I was born, and he never spoke a word about his history. And then later, in 1984, when I moved to California, I got close to his older brother and only sibling who lived in Santa Rosa, and learned about my father's history and just how completely traumatic and filled with abuse. He was on his own by the time he was 13. He grew up in the Stockton-Tracy area, very poor. His father committed suicide, the Murphy father, and then he had two stepfathers, both of whom were alcoholic and beat his mother. So what it helped me to understand was his strategy to not deal with his past. He ended up recreating it, through alcoholism, and he was kind of a rageaholic. But it really helped me to have empathy for him and understanding for him. And actually going to school at JFK and we had to do these 5-generation maps of our families, genograms, where you tracked patterns in families like alcoholism and cancer and, deaths and loss. And it just really opened my eyes to kind of we all have this ancestral legacy, some of which we don't even know what it is, but it's in us. So that's all by way of saying that often in Buddhism, there's you hear about dropping the storyline, and my own experience was you do that at your own peril if you don't know what the story is. So because it's so easy to unconsciously enact your past. And for example, I very early on made a determination that I would not be like my father, and there's so many ways that I'm like my father. So I'm sure some of you can relate. The other part of my The other part of my history is that my father was in the Foreign Service, and he worked for a branch of the State Department called USIA, not USAID, but United States Information Agency. Coincidentally, Mark Johnson, whom I met here, his father was in the same branch of the State Department, and when we connected and talked about our lives, there were a lot of parallels, because there's a lot of alcoholism in the Foreign Service. But part of my experience was that I was born in France, and I lived in Argentina, in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, in Bogota, Colombia, and in Helsinki, Finland. And that was before the days of email or Facebook, so part of my experience was getting very attached to people and then losing them, and kind of feeling like I had to rub them out because it was too painful to really deal with the sense of loss. The other piece of the dynamic of moving like that and of alcoholism is there's kind of a more rigid cultural boundary around the family. There's not extended family. And you're trying to be socialized as an American, but really having a very other cultural experience. I'm grateful to my father that we never lived in American enclaves. He really wanted us to have an experience of the culture. But you can sort of imagine the pressure cooker of, the nuclear family and alcohol and being in a foreign country. And my two oldest siblings, by the time I was 3 years old and we moved to Port-au-Prince, Haiti, there was not adequate schooling for them, so they were in boarding school. So I really didn't grow up with them. And then one of the kind of subsequent tragedies in my family was that both of my two oldest siblings are deceased. My sister died really unexpectedly at 33 of a rare autoimmune blood disorder. My oldest brother was a Vietnam vet and had a psychotic break, was paranoid schizophrenic. Ended up on the street, was actually missing for 16 years and presumed dead. And then in November of 2011, I was at lunch with Roy and my friend Alzak, and I got a phone call, and he had been found dead under a freeway overpass in Sacramento. So that was, devastating in a way, but also I didn't grow up with those two siblings, so I didn't really know them. So it was more a sense of regret that I didn't have a relationship with them. So anyway, it's very interesting to reveal all these things to you because I don't talk about them very much. Another thing about narrative that I wanted to say briefly was when I was 6 years old, my mother, we lived for 3 years in the Washington, D.C. area. My mother took me to see Mary Poppins. And so when I was 6 and 7, I think of these as the Julie Andrews years because I became obsessed with that story. And it was kind of a way that a narrative can save you, and be really nurturing. Because this was a story really of kind of a family therapist who comes in, as a very stern banker father. She disrupts the homeostasis of the family and kind of introduces fun and laughter, and and the father goes off and flies a kite with his kids, and then she leaves. And then the following year, The Sound of Music came out, and it was basically it was the same story. The stern Austrian father blowing the whistle, and except Julie Andrews marries him. And then there was the crushing blow of Audrey Hepburn getting the Eliza Doolittle role. But I've never revealed this to anyone, but when I was 6 years old, on a very hot, kind of breezy summer day, I went into a neighbor's yard and climbed up onto a fence with an umbrella. And I jumped off, you think really fully believing I was going to be propelled up into the clouds. And I came crashing down and I sprained my ankle. And in retrospect, I think that might be the moment I became a Buddhist. Because there was a kind of disillusionment with, okay, yeah, I love this story, but I have to be with this other, I have to find a way to be with the story that's really happening. Are we almost there? Are we doing time-wise? Thank you. So I wanted to kind of make that link between narrative. I think for me, I learned, I was very close to my mom, but the love was so conditional. I knew exactly who I needed to be. So I was so hidden in so many ways. So for me, coming out wasn't just about being gay, but also about, being myself and trying to figure out what that was in this kind of very rigid structure in which I found myself. And this is not an indictment of my family, because there was a lot of good stuff too, but the things that really shaped me, those are sort of the salient things that I've covered. Anyway, here's my mom. She's still alive, and she's 97. So I'm really grateful in terms of family of creation and sangha. I'm really grateful to be here. It seems like a miracle. If it hadn't been for World War II, my parents never would have met. But I think about how, if I hadn't been gay, I think that really gave me a very early impulse to find something else, because I felt like such a fish out of water in my family. I remember when I moved to San Francisco in '84, there was a song by Blonsky Beat called "Small Town Boy." I don't know if you remember that song, but among the lines were, "The answers you seek will never be found at home. The love that you need will never be found at home." And I think I knew that really, really early on. And so that made me curious about what is that? What is that impulse, beyond the identity with all the conditioning and that I'm this compliant person who can become whatever you need me to be. But there was this other thing, and I just got really curious about that. Kind of about what's essence and what's conditioning, and unpeeling the conditioning. And for me, that's a lot of what practice is about, and a lot of what enlightenment is about is simply lightening up. It's not esoteric for me at all. I'm really not interested in kind of jhanas and esoteric states, and I just want to be here with you. So.
Thank you. I learned a lot about you. I didn't know. And one of the things that strikes me is how similar our genograms are. I had a similar father. He wasn't in the Foreign Service, but he was in the Navy, and so we were pretty nomadic also. I was born in Philadelphia, and in a hospital named after the first homeopathic physician. His name is Hanuman. Similar pronunciation, but different spelling than Hanuman. I kind of like it. But I was born there. My mother was from western Pennsylvania, a small town called Bedford near Pittsburgh, and I didn't know this until I was 13 years old, but the person I was raised to believe was my father really had adopted me. And I've never met my biological father. According to her, they dated, and when she got pregnant, he said, well, I guess we'll have to get married. And she said, oh, no, we don't. And that was, in a nutshell, one of the qualities of my mother. But I fortunately was raised the first couple of years by my grandparents, her parents, who had a very large farm, and dairy farm. And I got to experience, I believe, some unconditional love. And that, I think, has been foundational to what shred of sanity I do have, is having experienced that at some point. She met my father at an ROTC dance in Philadelphia, and when they later got married, they took me away from my grandparents. We moved to Florida for a while, and Rhode Island, and other places, but we moved to his family's in Alaska, Anchorage, Alaska, where I lived for 5 years. And he was from a dairy farm in Minnesota originally, but I was very much like a fish out of water. I felt like, I remember the first time, or at least that I recall seeing him, that he entered the door, and it was in this Navy-based housing, and it was like the door was really far away, like, and there's black and white tile floors, and it was just like hollow in there. It was like, who is that person? And he was taking care of me because my mother was in Providence, the hospital in Providence, Rhode Island, having my 3-year-old brother. I'm the oldest of 3 boys, the youngest of which his name is Michael. Alan was being born, and that's when I feel like I met him for the first time. But I always had that connection, that sort of typifies my connection to him most of the time growing up. Like, who is this person? Like, he's a retired truck driver, 6'4.5", and very much very self-centered, and has a huge heart, but he usually has to wound somebody before he realizes the error that he made. And we were physically beat a lot. I remember being so afraid sometimes, and him yelling that I would be afraid of losing control of my bowels. I would be so afraid, and sometimes he would hit us. I talked to him this morning and wished him a happy birthday, and now we have actually a surprisingly amiable relationship. I do feel like I love him, and have a lot more understanding in retrospect. And I have to say that when my mother told me that he was my adopted father, I was relieved. One, because like you, I decided I did not want to be like him, but also it made my life up to that point, it made sense why I felt different. Like, why didn't I have the same connection my brothers did? He was very much into sports, very loud. He's a Leo, very much, in the world, bodily, and they were into sports. And I like to, ride my bicycle and race dirt bikes and solo sports, or ride around with my buddies and stuff. But hitting each other on the field. Later on, I got into martial arts and things, but it just seemed so foreign to me. But we also had good times, and we did a lot of camping and boating and things like that. But it was always like safer to be sort of invisible, and so for me also, growth has been very much about inhabiting my own body and in the world, and being seen and things. And so later, my parents then got divorced when I was 15, and that was the first time my mother had a psychotic break, or nervous breakdown. And being the oldest and also the closest with my mother, I became her confidant. And she had paranoid delusions about my father doing this and that. And, it was, at the time, it was flattering in a way to be trusted that much as a kid, but it was the ultimate setup because I was really powerless and unable to do anything. And she would do things like, the phone would ring in the morning, getting ready for school, and she'd say, "Oh, I'm downtown. What should I do with our dog?" I said, "What do you mean?" Well, she followed me downtown. I'm leaving home. And I went to school on the bus like I did every day, and I told my friend and so we decided to go back and take the car and try and find her. It was such a primitive, try and rescue her, Well, we didn't do that, and I got in a lot of trouble because I took the car. And my father thought, though, that I had her in the car because my friend had long hair, and he drove past us. And anyway, once he realized what was going on, he didn't get upset with me. And she called a couple days later, and that her brother flew out from Pennsylvania, and we drove with my youngest brother, Michael, back to be with her family. And I was so relieved to be going back there. But that was probably the one time in my life that I ever wondered, why would I keep living? And how could there be a God that would let this happen? I just didn't understand. But she got a lot better, and I was in a new school, and I loved moving. It was always like a new start, new friends, new places, and but that's when I had my first bout with drug abuse, and in retrospect, it was fortunate because I ended up in therapy as a result of that, and I consider that to be my first mentor, a man named Jim Adams, who really, I think, reparented me. I would go and hang out at his office and see him 3 times a week, and eventually, it was like psychology was like discovering a second floor in my house. I lived up in grown up in this really concrete world, your body, and you produce work, and, people judge you based on your friends and what it was very salt of the earth. But to be able to reflect on psychological dynamics was profoundly empowering. And, he normalized and validated validated a lot of my experience and pointed out how abnormal some of the things that happened to me were, and gave validity to my feeling disconnected. But to be able to reflect on those things from an intelligent perspective and really look at what a healthy family would do, and that it's possible through revisiting those things to heal things, not to get rid of them, but to change the relationship to them, come to a new understanding, a more mature understanding. So that was a real godsend, literally. I saw him for 5 years, and actually got hired at the drug and alcohol center that I was a client in at one time. And then I went to college, and in my first semester of college, I had a mandatory English class in which there was a book of short stories, and then there was the story out of the introduction or the first part of Be Here Now, written by Ram Dass. And that story I felt like my story. Somebody told my story. And that was such a great gift. I used to think it was like, discovered there was another floor in my house, but it was like blew the roof off. That, there was such a thing as unconditional love. that included everything. I didn't plan on this, but and I became that book. That was '79, and I just became the focus of my life. Fierce Grace. And I got to meet him, I think 1981 or something like that, and shyly carry up 3 copies of his books, have him sign it. And I had his book, and I forgot I wrote my name inside there. I gave it to him, and he said, "Look, I said, your name's Jeff, right?" But it wasn't until 1984 that I actually got to do a retreat with him for 5 days up in Flagler, Washington. And Dale Borborn was a part of that, and Stephen Vine. Johnny Tall led chanting. I'd never chanted before, but I really liked that. And I got to spend almost about, 45 minutes or an hour in the schoolroom. We had to sign up for an interview. We felt rented here. And I had all these thoughts. I was going to tell him this. I was going to tell him, various things. And all those things, beforehand I went and meditated in this little chapel. And on the wall was this prayer flag with Hanuman, a picture of Hanuman, who's got holding his chest open and showing that the only thing in his heart was Ram and Sita. But I went in there and I was like nervously looking around, and he said, "I'm looking right here." And so we just looked at each other, and I just started telling him things that I'd never planned on, but it was all the things that I never talked about, my deepest secrets. And his, if you've ever done that eye-gazing meditation with somebody, how their face transforms and changes and looks like a really ugly demon or child and all these things. But after a while, all of a sudden I saw over his brow the same brow that I saw in Hanuman before that. As if the subtle body. And that was honestly the first moment I had a tangible experience of myself as a soul. And that my life story before that was really just my own human life story. But I was a soul like we all are, but that I was a part of a lineage, a living lineage, and one that I hadn't been looking for. I was not interested in Hinduism. But he asked me to stay in touch after that, which I did. Part of what I told him was that the year before, my mother had committed suicide, and how hard that was, and some of the story of her life. And things about myself, that had happened to him as well, not suicide. That just shifted the figure and ground in my whole life, and so that's when I, began going on more retreats, and that was in 83 actually. It was 1983. In 1985, I found out that I was HIV positive. And sometime later, I realized it was actually, my diagnosis happened on the same day that my mother's suicide occurred, which really scared me. I didn't know about the Enneagram, but I certainly felt, this possibility of just sort of running off these family patterns. And so I called him and asked him what he would do, and he said, well, you know, if you could go on a Stephen Levine retreat, and it was coming up at Brighton Bush, so I did that. And that was really helpful because in 1985 there were a lot of people with AIDS, and there was about 10 of us there who were at least gay, if not with HIV, and we had our own sort of panel at one point about that. But one thing I learned with Stephen and Andre on the line was how when we can be with our own pain, there's a point at which our pain becomes the pain, you know, as in like the First Noble Truth, kind of, you know, the hue or the details, some of the content may differ, but we all know the pain of separation and grief. And even though ironically we may feel the most separate and alone when we're in that place, that's the nature of that feeling, you know, and is actually what I believe connects us, amongst other things. So since then, in addition to years of therapy, I also got to travel a number of times in India, and one of the times in 1990 was with Ram Dass and some other people for about 3 weeks, and we got to visit the places in Bihar now that he wrote about, the temples in the mountains of Himalayas, where he met Beam Karoli Baba and spent weeks in silence under the teachings of Haridas. You know, it was like the time of my life. I felt like he would say, "You see that window up there? That's where I was." Every day at 5 o'clock, the last bus would go up the hill, and there was no way of getting out of here. And I'd think, if I got on that bus, I could be at the Trocadero in New York in 24 hours dancing. But I didn't. And every day he wanted to leave. You know, it's that like attraction, fear. But, that was toward the end of the 5-year job that I had working on the AIDS ward at San Francisco General. I was a Shanti counselor, and my job was to provide emotional support to the people, the guys with AIDS, and their families. And I wanted to do that job because, one, I had heard the horror stories that we're all familiar with about how guys were getting diagnosed and their families would show up from Delaware, having, you know, rejected them years before and disrespecting the lover, take all their belongings and leave in shame of their, you know, sinful family member. And it just was also, as someone with HIV, one of my strategies, I've sort of been counterphobic in my life, in that when I'm afraid of something, I have at times wanted to go right to it so that it would help, I could have images. So one of my greatest fears was dying or approaching death and being treated as if I wasn't there anymore, the way that they can do in hospitals so well, you know, objectifying you, and that anything maybe I could help convey to someone else that they weren't alone there, someone heard them or felt about them, and so I got to do that. It also took a lot out of me, and at the end, a lover I had been with many years before himself died of AIDS, and he was originally from Mexico, and I helped him go back to visit his families and with oxygen tanks, not even medications and things. But it totally, you know, my own health was declining from the burnout, and you know, I'd been opposed to the standard therapies that were out there like ACT, and so eventually the job was defunded and we were all laid off. But to make a long story short, I had to go through another round of addiction and became, for over 10 years, addicted to crystal meth. And despite all my spiritual credentials and my knowledge and things, and fortunately in 2007, went into therapy, outpatient treatment for that, and I haven't used since, and now we're in rehab. But it taught me a lot about spiritual materialism, the kind that Trungpa Rinpoche talks about, and that these practices that we do are not to bolster or make our egos more comfortable, and it's also important, as Michael said, to know where our tender places are, what's hurt inside of us, and hopefully develop some healthy sense of self. As Ram Dass says, you got to become somebody before you become nobody. And so I'm practicing being somebody. Yeah, right. I still honk my horn cars and swear under my breath and all those things, but less over time. And I'm just so grateful to have had mentors like I have, and to, even in the darkest moments of my life, somehow part of me will say, Ram, it's just, the veil will pierce at some point. It just can only get so intense before that happens. And later I kind of understood that in another way during a course on service that Ram Dass taught, in which we were talking about change. And he said, as long as we're not resting in the place that doesn't change, we'll be afraid of the place that does. So I'll end there. So,
Thank you. Thank you both so very much. Do we have, well, we do have some announcements. I'll start. Next week our speaker will be Eugene Cash. Eugene's the founding teacher of the San Francisco Insight Meditation Community of San Francisco. He teaches at Spirit Rock Meditation Center and leads intensive meditation retreats internationally. His teaching is influenced by both Burmese and Thai streams of the Theravada tradition, as well as Zen and Tibetan Buddhist practice. He's also a teacher of the Diamond Approach, a school of spiritual investigation and self-realization developed by A.H. Almas. So we hope you can join us for that. Dhamma is the term for generosity. We hope that you will be generous in supporting the sangha and all that we do, and the outreach and everything, and having this wonderful space. Suggested donation of $8 to $10 is appreciated, but anything you can give is most welcome. As we go into our social period, please wish David Margolis happy birthday. Is it a big one, David? Is it a big one?
The big one? You mean 59?
Okay, that's pretty good. Do we have a host today? Kenny.
Hi. I'm the host for today. I brought some strawberries, cookies, and teas, so enjoy yourselves. And if you have tea with a cup, please wash them with hot soapy water. And as Tom said, suggested donation is $10. I'll be walking around with the Nana bowl, so you can pass me the money in the bowl. And if you are new and want to get onto the mailing list, there's a sign-up sheet right outside. And lastly, the people gather for lunch at about 12:30 at the door, so feel free to join the group.
Great. Other announcements?
Well,
Yes.
I just want to say we had hoped to leave a little space for questions, but we'll be out there if you have any questions for us.
But thank you both for a remarkable show.
Yeah,
really.
it
was great.
Thanks.
I just wanted to say that I have about 3 tomato plants. If anybody wants to rear them, I'm looking for people to adopt. They're right upstairs. I'll grab them if you like. You have a backyard with sun.
For a good home.
Yeah.
Okay, let's gather in a circle for our dedication prayer. By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity without too much attachment or too much aversion, believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.